And welcome back to the show. Our next guest is an award-winning author, a political commentator, and race and gender empowerment expert. Now, prior to the global pandemic, Dr. Avis regularly conducted workshops and training on women's empowerment, political representation, and power, as well as entrepreneurial success on behalf of U.S. embassies across the globe. She now joins us to share a little bit more. The co-founder of MAXBLACK Media, Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeever. And Dr. Jones-DeWeever, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I'll just say Dr. Avis, if that's okay. So,
absolutely. Feel free.
Well, listen, I want to talk a little bit about your work, because really talking front and center on the issue of women's rights, it still becomes an issue in 2021. The fight still continues. Talk to me about where you see things going right now, because we can say we've seen some progression, but still a lot of work left to be done.
It's a lot of work left to be done. I think that the specific fight for gender equality is ever evolving in the same way that the fight for racial equality is ever evolving. This is one of those demons that we continually have to fight generation after generation. But the good news is that we have fighters who are still here willing to put in the work. And so what we're seeing right now, for example, with regards to this issue, are a lot of things. One of the things that I think that's very important for people to think about, particularly with this context that we're facing in the post-pandemic reality, is something called the She Session. One of my peers, I actually went to graduate school with her, so proud to see Nicole Mason. She's now the president of the Institute for Women's Policy Research. She coined that phrase because they were looking at exactly who were disproportionately impacted with the loss of jobs following the recession. And we see that following the pandemic, and it was women. Women were disproportionately likely to be out of the workforce, either because they lost their job or because they had the increased sort of child rearing, schooling responsibilities as schools closed and are still yet to really be able to come back in full force. So because of these sort of dual responsibilities that women face, they're having a harder time making their way back into this recovering economy. And that's one challenge that I think women across America and maybe even across the globe are struggling with as we look to get back to what I think will be a new normal, not exactly the same normal that we had before.
Yeah, employment and unemployment continue to be a big challenge post-pandemic, no matter what. Pre-COVID, we know that women's rights, when it comes to pay and pay equity, was really, disproportionate. How do you see things coming out of the pandemic? Do you see that shortening up a little bit, or do you see that even expanding with COVID now entering into the mix?
You know, it'll be interesting to see that, because on the one hand, we know that employers are having a work shortage. So a lot of employers are now in the position where they're having to compete for the best talent, meaning that they are having to raise their pay and give other special bonuses and other special things that they are offering individuals in order to try to woo them to work for them. But the reality is that we also know that we have a long history, and there's no reason to expect that this will change, of pay inequities. And we not only see wage gaps, generally speaking, across the sexes. I would argue that we see multifaceted wage gaps when we sort of layer onto that issues that women of color, and particularly Black women, face. So, for example, if the overall wage gap is about 82 cents to the dollar, for Black women, it's about 63 cents to the dollar. And there's a wage gap that exists between Black women and white women, where Black women make only about 79 cents to the dollar that white women make. And so, these inequities, unfortunately, I would expect to remain even as overall pay increases, because in my perspective, this is an example of built-in institutionalized racism and sexism in the intersection of those two in this economy. And it's going to take more than a pandemic, I think, to straighten all of that out.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine. We were watching a basketball game not too long ago. Just the other day, we were talking about the Milwaukee Bucks. They have a co-owner that's actually an African-American woman, and it was a startling sight to see, because many times when we see leadership success, we don't see women and women of color in that arena. Talk to us about what we're seeing right now, because we have seen recently, due to Black Lives Matter, I would attribute more people elevated who are women in leadership, corporate positions. Give us a little bit about that leadership success that we're seeing.
Yeah, we are seeing a lot of organizations are now being a little bit more mindful of the fact that they need to do what's necessary in order to diversify their leadership. You know, it's kind of, I guess better late than never. And there's still more work to do with that. But for me, for someone who for many years worked in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, it shows me that all along they could have been doing it, but there was a calculated choice not to. You know, one of the reasons why I don't do that work anymore is because of the frustration that I felt around, you know, being invited in, being asked to do all of these trainings, and giving people recommendations and organizations representation around what they need to do in order to not only diversify their workforce, but specifically diversify their leadership. And then leaving those institutions and still seeing them in essence be like many little versions of institutional apartheid, where you have an all-white leadership structure, and to the degree that there is diversity in the company, it's at the lower levels. And so it's good to see that now finally they are making some movement to correct that. My next challenge to them is to give those individuals the support that they need to be able to succeed and thrive. What we know from looking at what companies oftentimes do is that they oftentimes give promotions to women, Black people at moments where the particular departments that they're supposed to lead are going through some sort of crisis. And then they oftentimes don't give them the support that they need to really be able to see that crisis through. So I'm hoping that they don't just put these people in place and expect them to work miracles. I hope that they put them in place and then give them what they need to really be able to thrive.
Yeah, very, very important to give people the necessary resources. You spoke a little bit earlier about taking your gifts and talents and using them in your own way. And so I know one of those ways is that you authored a book. I want you to share a little bit about your book and really how you look to empower women through that.
Yes, so I have a book called How Exceptional Black Women Lead. And really, this book was around pulling together the knowledge of exceptionally successful Black women in various different spaces. So I include perspectives in there from women who are in corporate, from women who are nonprofit leaders, for women who are entrepreneurs, for women who are individuals who sort of like are just community leaders. And so I want to show the different perspectives of leadership and how that shows up. And the whole idea here is to be able to demonstrate that, number one, Black women, as I mentioned, have a very different challenge as it relates to ascending to leadership than other people do. We are two sort of rungs removed from the space of institutional power in this nation, in that we are neither white nor are we male. And so we have a very specific area to traverse when we're looking to make our path to leadership. And my hope is that as each new generation embarks upon this journey, that we don't have them embark upon that journey on ground zero, having to figure everything out on their own. My hope was to provide this space where I could collect institutional knowledge from these women who are successful leaders in those various fields, so that they can share their stories and give tips and advice to the women who are in the field right now, trying to make that journey about what sort of path they should take and which things that they should avoid in order to sort of move up that ladder. And it's something that I'm super proud of, that has been, you know, I think very well received, not only in this country, but around the world.
Yeah. Congratulations. And I want to talk about the issue of white fragility, because that's important. I think when you're trying to climb that corporate ladder, trying to really make it, whether you're a woman or even, you know, a person of color, really trying to establish yourself in the corporate sector, no doubt that you run up against the wall of white fragility. Give me your perspective.
White fragility is real, and it is persistent. I mean, it's as American as apple pie. Here is the challenge with white fragility. There is this belief of, and we see it not only at the micro level in terms of experiences that people face every day, little indignities, little microaggressions that they might have to endure at work, but we also see it at the macro level. When you talk about what's going on right now, just in terms of the political sphere with regards to the war on the 1619 Project, the war on critical race theory, for example, those to me are prime time examples of white fragility in action. What it represents to me is this sort of hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil approach to being able to avoid the responsibility of creating a more fair and just society. And it sort of manifests itself as this unwillingness to hear truth, this unwillingness to then be responsible for the implications of that truth, and therefore not taking any actions to create a better and more fair system. Unfortunately, I wish I had a magic wand that I could wave that could get rid of it today, but my answer to this question is that we cannot bend to white fragility. We cannot kowtow and bow to white fragility. It's kind of, to me, it's likens to what happens when you spoil a child. If you spoil a child because you're letting them know that they never do anything wrong and everything they do is fine, then they will just be completely uncontrollable as they grow up and get involved in very dangerous and very bad things. In many ways, I would argue the white community has been spoiled in this country. And that is because we refuse to sort of have any sort of accountability that's related to bad behavior in major ways. And so I really think that this issue of white fragility will not go away. I think we cannot back down. I think that we have to continue to shine a light on injustice and indignities when they occur in every form, whether they be at the macro level or at the micro level, and then move forward with the truth that's necessary to make sure that everyone is aware of those challenges, and then prescriptions around what to do in the future in order to create a better society for us all.
Okay. Help me out here, because I'm trying to scratch my head. I'm scratching my head because I watch a lot of these conversations on critical race theory lately, and I'm saying to myself, bruh, you just don't get it. Like, it's either you just don't get it, or I think you're gonna hit me on this one, help me out on this one, you just don't want to get it.
Yeah, they don't want to get it. Here's the reality. Actually, my dissertation, the theoretical background for my dissertation was critical race theory when I wrote my dissertation now over 20 years ago. And it was a concept that I was then introduced to as a very upper level PhD student in political science. It's a canon that comes out of the legal scholar world. I say all that to say that most people have absolutely no freaking idea what critical race theory is. Okay, it is not taught in elementary and secondary education. It is only something that usually is taught at the very, very high levels of a graduate degree education that, quite frankly, most people never ascend to. And so a lot of the sort of controversy that you're hearing about critical race theory right now is really a political ploy, which has been put out there as a dog whistle to white people that they are supposed to be angry about truth-telling with regards to their privileges. And oftentimes there are complete fabrications that are related to what is and is not critical race theory. The reality is that what it is a very well respected sort of theoretical series of work that's been put together over decades, that's typically only taught at the very highest levels of the graduate degrees. And what it really, at the heart of it, really focuses on is the degree to which whiteness is seen as property in this nation, and how whiteness has been used in various ways and actually been inculcated in the law that privileges some and give unearned privileges to some, the white population, as well as giving unearned disadvantages to others, including people of color. And it's that level of truth-telling that many do not want to subscribe to. It will require then facing white fragility. It will require then honesty. And ultimately, it will require then, if we claim to be a moral nation, it will require that we would do something about it. And because so many in this nation refuse to do anything about the inequities that are built into the system that privilege whiteness and also punishes the lack of whiteness or people of color, because so many people refuse to do anything about it because they benefit from it, what they choose to do instead is to ignore it. And so that, to me, is really what's behind this all out attack on critical race theory. They are threatened by truth because they understand that once that truth is revealed, that if they claim to be moral people, then they have to do something to correct those inequities.
Yeah, we have this conversation, and we're going to have this conversation. I'm going to let you go now, but I'm going to bring you back so that we can have this real conversation about critical race theory, because I think it's important that we talk about it. I think that people understand really what's behind it, because you really talk about what's behind it and how we really get around that. So, Dr. Avis, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.